702. Education.
He is Group Chief Advisor at Andisa Consulting Group. His name is Andisa Ramavhunga. Did I say Andisa Consulting?
It's Ntiyiso Consulting Group.
Ntiyiso Consulting. I heard myself. The Ntiyiso Consulting Group. His name is Andisa Ramavhunga, and he joins me now. Andisa, thank you so much, my brother, for joining me this evening.
Oh, thank you very much, Aubrey. It's always great to be here.
Money. What is that?
Aubrey, I felt being thrown under the bus with this one because we can talk at length about the concept of money and what it represents. And I'm sure it represents different things to different people.
Yeah.
And it's a source of a lot of pain and a lot of joy. And I would argue, and I would stand up on this argument that this is one of man's greatest inventions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I don't know. I mean, we can talk quite a lot, right? There's technical definitions of money. There's what I call social definitions of money, what you and I have probably, and a lot of people have become accustomed to. But I think I'll be failing the people if I don't tell them the deep philosophical history of money and how we get here and how we denote value, because I think quite a lot has been lost through history and generation and evolution of people and how we interact and trade between ourselves, trade between countries, trade between continents. There's quite a lot that has happened that has influenced money to what we know, what it is today. And that history, although I'm not an expert in it, but at least I think I'm
aware of it, yeah.
Aware of it enough, and by the way, think about it quite a lot, and how it has come. So it's there's a lot of controversy as well with it. But I think let's maybe take it back to the basics to say, why do we need money before we come and define it? Why do we need money? Why did it come to being in the first place? You'd understand that it was born out of necessity. So as man lived, as man provided for himself, and as populations grow, we needed a means of exchanging value between ourselves. And back then, before society became probably modernized, industrialized, we found ways to exchange that value. And if you remember, without boggling down the history, we used what we call the barter system.
Yes.
So you would plant maize. I would be a fisherman. I needed maize. You needed fish. You'll trade with me. You'll say, I'll give you maybe a kilo of maize, and I'll maybe exchange that with you, half a kilo of the fish that I had, and we're all happy. And that's where the essence of money begins. So I would like to define it as a means of exchanging value. Obviously, things started becoming complicated. You would understand that if I'm fishing a lot and I have a lot of fish, and you are doing the maize and you have a lot of maize, there's only so much fish you can buy from me. And quite a number of questions arose around what is the fair value of my fish vis-a-vis your maize.
Yeah.
Is it a fair exchange?
Yes.
So this is where the definition of money as an equalizer or a basis through which we can exchange value became quite important. And I would like to add that the final definition of money is the ability to store value. And you'd understand, you as a farmer, your product by nature had longevity, so you could store your value long enough. Me as a fisherman, my longevity is not that long, so my store of value. So I needed to exchange my stuff much quickly. Right. So it made sense that if I'm exchanging my fish, I could keep that money in the bank and it stored value. So just in its simplest form, money is the exchange of value. So it's a means by which we exchange value. It gives us a fair and comparative ways to exchange that value. And finally, it stores that value. I think that's what money typically is. I think I would have been tempted to just come here and say, look, money is value, and therefore equate money to value. But there's different types of values, and how do you equate one value to the other? And money allows you to do that.
So what I'm getting out of that brief sort of definition of money is that, and this is very interesting to me, that at first, how we establish value is by how much I need something.
Yeah.
And not just need it, but willing to pay for it.
To pay for it, yeah.
So what do I need, and what am I willing to part with to get that thing that I believe I need?
Yes.
That is value.
That is value.
Right?
That is value.
So in the beginning, right at the beginning with the bartering system, where we exchange stuff that I have for what you have, the value was determined mainly on the basis of my need.
Yeah, you needed fish from me.
Right.
And the only ways you can access that fish is
by giving you what I've got, which is the maize. Right?
Yeah, and you're coming to some of the challenges. I mean, what happens to a situation when I don't want maize? So it means there's some need that you have out there, and you have an inability to access it.
Precisely.
And hence the definition or the invention of money.
Right. So money became a way by which we neutralized the dependence on a particular commodity to justify value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm simplifying because we started with the barter system. I'd like to add another. There was, by the way, a time when we had commodity money. So these were coins that were printed in terms of gold and silver. If you remember in the Bible, they say you threw 5 pieces of silver.
Yeah.
Yeah, and simply it's because that time silver had value. And every piece of silver was worth the silver that it was used to be printed on. So again, it was a way of trying to equalize what value is. To say a piece of bread is worth maybe 1 ounce of silver. A piece of wagon is worth maybe 2 pieces of gold. And again, as and when you started trading, the system started to
what did you call it? You called it evolve. Fair value.
Yeah. So we started with a barter system had no fair value.
Yeah.
Because there was no way of trying to create a common baseline for us to be able to trade our common value that we were.
Yeah.
So with the movement of what we called a commodity currency, which was money at the time, and mainly there were gold coins and silver coins, we started exchanging that value. But obviously the world is different today because we're using currency.
What was the basis of establishing fair value? And in other words, I get the fact that during the bartering system, I got what you had.
Yeah.
Because I needed what you had.
Yeah.
But a little complication happens. I need something else. But you've only got maize.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that my 2 bushels of maize are actually really worth your 5 fishes.
Yeah.
How did we get to the place where we understand that my sack of mealie meal or of maize is actually equal to your 5 fish? How did we come to that understanding?
Yeah, and I'm probably simplifying because we could get here and talk about the history, which is fascinating, by the way.
Sure.
I would ask people to read up if they have. With a barter system, although I'm saying it's exchange of stuff, it never was that simple.
Right.
It was always gonna be a hassle.
Right.
And the settlement, it's some sort, and it was very much personal, one-on-one. What value you could access today was very different to the type of value that you could access tomorrow. So there was still a fair trade of even though we're exchanging value and we understand what value we are getting, settling at what that price would be or at what cost to the next person was still very much a negotiation. Vis-a-vis the currencies we have today, if bread is worth 2 rand, it's 2 rand. There's no negotiations.
There's a universal sort of understanding of what the fair value is.
Of what that fair value is, and it's always denominated in rand.
Right.
That's why the denominator, we can go cents, but let's keep it simple to say rand. And obviously the more expensive or the more value you want to access, the bigger the amount of rands you need to then part ways with. That was really the establishment. And obviously with trade and coin exchange of silvers, they developed standards and norms that they settled on, because at that point in time there was no arbitrage of some sort that allowed them. But because of the ways that we lived in, messages quickly spread to say, I went to Aubrey, I exchanged 2 coins of silver for a loaf of bread, and it started becoming a norm of some sort, and we settle.
Right.
But what that then allows us to do is to peg the value of whatever a value or whatever good we wanted to access at that time to a particular value. So that's again, it's money, and I always say that money by itself has no value, right? I could argue with silver. The intrinsic value is there because you could sell the silver itself because it was again a commodity to produce other goods, and you can melt that coin. But the aim of the value that I'm talking about is to say that the money itself has no intrinsic value, but the value is in what you believe as an individual you are getting, and hence the definition of saying value is much bigger than just money. Money is just a means of exchange, of accessing that value, and it does not matter which currency you use, whether
But would it be true that the idea of fair value can be imposed upon us? In other words, I personally might not necessarily believe that it is fair value for me to buy this cup at 20 Rand, but that's the price at which it has now been benchmarked, and whether I like it or not, that's the price now.
So you're getting correctly philosophical with me again, Aubrey. Yeah, you would argue that fair value is always perceived, right? But we quickly circle to standards, and those standards are more often than not determined by the laws of supply and demand.
Okay.
And you'll see that the more available a commodity is, the less money would be required to access it, because it's widely available, and the more scarce that it is, the higher the money that you need to access. But I mean, we've priced stuff today, right? We know exactly what the cost of goods are. I mean, you know exactly how much it is to produce a loaf of bread, and you can summarily understand what that cost is, and you add your markup to it, you'll get the value of what that good is, and it's fairly stable, because again, you need to compete with other people who are doing bread or not. But the stuff you and I have been talking about, this is where it pushes the button of that value, right? Where you can sell the same type of bread at an exorbitant amount of, just because of the function of your strategy and business model.
Yes.
Remember that time we used the example of that sportsman who was launching that sports drink that was being sold at
Prime, I think.
Which is nothing exceptional, because it's still a juice, probably the same concentrate and the same material that's being used in other juices, but because of the branding and how they are positioning that in the consumer's mind, the value rises, and true to the fact that we are saying that value is perceived, right? It's hardly tangible. It's something that you perceive to be enhancing to your life, to be improving your life in one way or another. It might not be the same for the next person.
Yes.
You just need to find a large enough group of those people who think like that, and you can be able to create a business.
And therefore impose your value for a particular commodity or service.
I think you've just defined branding.
Yeah.
Right? That's what branding is.
Really?
I mean, when you go out and buy these large European goods, by the way, Gucci, Nike, let's not maybe mention names, because we don't have the right.
What?
But what you'll be surprised on is most of these goods, by the way, are manufactured in China.
Yeah.
So it means the cost of doing them, the pure cost of doing them, that means now getting the raw material, getting people to sew it, getting logistics to move them around the world. The cost is fairly reasonable. Where it becomes much more expensive is when you add that sticker on top of it. And this is the function of branding. And all these exercises we've been talking about strategy, are exactly that, right?
The imposition of value. Because of whatever perception we might have, or whatever exclusivity we aspire to in having that particular product.
Yeah.
But I don't want to lose our trend of thought as to the question, what is money? By the way, please give us a call. What is money? What do you understand money to be? How do we derive value?
Yeah.
And how do we create value such that we are comfortable with the price, not the cost, the price of something. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about that on 011-883-0702. And I suppose, Andisa, the cost will at some level determine the price, right?
That's standard pricing mechanism, by the way. A lot of pricing that you get is cost driven. A lot of people would they would quantify how much it costs to produce a good or to deliver a service, and they will add what we call a margin. That it means,
yes,
this is the value. This is my value to it, and that's why we use things like value chain and supply chains. It's the aggregation of all those costs up until a good is delivered, and then you add your own markup in it, and that becomes a price. And I mean, look, we're simplifying it because there's a lot of other factors that determine where the pricing lands, things like competition,
sure.
Things like whether the good is perceived of being of high value or not. And all those, I guess, factors that you need to consider in. But where strategy plays a good role is as we've mentioned, is to say that price does not need to be cost reflective. Your margins can be 1,000-fold. Nothing says the rule that says you cannot do that.
Sure.
But it is a function of...
That's branding and marketing.
Yeah.
Right? Sure.
But all those are a function of creating that value.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Give us a call, 011-883-0702. Money, what do you understand it to be? Yeah?
Yeah.
And really part of the reason why I keep going back to this question, Andisa, is very often I feel powerless. I don't feel like I own the relationship between what I work for and what I have to pay for certain things that I need. Mm-hmm. We've just touched on that a few moments ago with the idea of saying that that's branding, right?
Yeah.
We don't really determine what the price of bread is going to be.
Yeah.
Somebody somewhere determines what the price of petrol is going to be. Somebody somewhere determines what the price of electricity is going to be. And yet I'm the person that must work for this value of exchange. But I have very little control as to how much what I need is going to cost.
Yeah.
Would that be fair to?
No, that is fair. And you throwing me into the murky world I was trying to avoid. Because it's a lot of people, and I could put a bet with you now that a lot of people think money is if you were to sum up, let me ask you this question. If you were to sum up all the coins in the world and all the notes in the world, do you think that's the money in the world?
No. I've now come to understand that.
Absolutely.
Yeah? But if you had asked me that question maybe 30 minutes ago, before you and I had the conversation about value, about branding, about how we can inflate the value of something beyond its cost, right? Yeah. I would have said yes. Then I would have had all of the money. But I now understand, based on our conversation, that value isn't just on the base, isn't determined by the cost of something.
Yeah.
Other factors come into it. And you've talked about branding. You've talked about exclusivity. We've talked about all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
But I'm beginning to understand that value has nothing to do with the cost sometimes.
Yeah.
Generally it does. But very, very often the margins that people add onto the cost of whatever it is that they are selling can be 1,000-fold, as you've already explained.
Yeah.
So I suppose I'm grappling with the fact that here I am breaking my back.
Yeah.
And I don't have control over the price of something.
Yeah.
And I might still need it. One case in point is electricity, water. The fact that I don't have control over the fact that once there's load shedding and my lights go off and then they return, that I've lost 20 units on my prepaid. I've got no control over that. So it begs the question, what is money that has me working so hard and yet I have no control over things? And these questions I'm raising now can be taken to a macro level. I'm really taking them at a micro level, but they can really be
in fact, you are already at the macro level, and I'll unpeel this, and I hope I don't really complicate this.
Sure.
I did say I've got this love and hate relationship with with money, not from a personal point of view, but around how the world views it and how it has come to distort our view of the world and how it has influenced, I guess, the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and how it continues being used to drive that gap. But let me shock you a bit, Aubrey. I did say that business is about value. And I want us to separate the notion of value and money.
Right.
What you are grappling with is the value, is money per se, not so much value.
Right.
Your inability to create value allows you to then grapple with issues of money.
Right.
So I said money is a means of exchange. Remember, we went to the barter system and
we'll continue with the evolution of this.
And I said, look, there's so many factors to it, right? And by the way, we're now going into the murky world again because it's quite important based on the question you've put in of economics and macroeconomics and the functioning of the economy. And you'll see that at the center of it is money, right? So I said the money was still manageable when it was pegged to at least a barter system, as imperfect as it is. It had a way though of managing how we exchange value, right? I would even argue the commodity-based currencies were somewhat fair, because whatever gold you had or silver you had, you could always melt it or use it for other means.
Right.
It preserved your value.
It had an intrinsic value of its own.
Yeah. But we somewhat moved away from that as the world. You understand, we've now into what we call currency.
Yes.
In fact, in true economic sense, they call it fiat
currency,
money.
Yes.
That is not backed by any means of commodities, by the way. It means governments can print them as they want and so forth. And that one presents particular challenges for laymen like you and I. For example, the more government prints money, the cheaper our money becomes. But guess what? The value is still there. The good is still there. The good doesn't become any cheaper. The good becomes much more expensive. That's why we go into the thing that
you just need more of those notes.
Of those notes to access the same value. And that's why we'll say it's inflation now. It's hopefully we don't get to hyperinflation. We go to terms like inflations. That's why as a business...
So just stop there, because I'm losing you.
Yeah.
So you're saying to me inflation is when the value of a good or service stays the same, but requires more
That's what
money
it is. Price increases is exactly that. I mean, what has changed in the price of, what has changed in the makeup of bread?
Right.
This is still the same bread we used to eat.
Sure.
Probably 20 years ago. There's not much evolution or innovation that has gone into bread. I would argue that maybe we're being sold that they are healthy or not. But bread has not really changed that much, right? But the price has staggered. The price has become much, much, much more. And this is what inflation is all about. I mean, the cars are cars. I mean, you'll argue that there's some innovations there. But the comparative prices of cars have exploded. The apples that we buy today, the price is much, much more.
And what is the reason for that? Is because our money has become less
and less valuable. That's why I'm saying distinguish the value and the means of exchanging the value.
Right.
Means of exchanging the value is money.
Right.
Remember, we defined it, and we said it's the means of exchanging the value. I went on to say, what I mean, it needs to be generally acceptable.
Right.
And it needs to be trust. And I'm talking now about psychological trust and less the physical trust.
Right.
That one is managed much well. And the aim of it equalizing prices, what we are able to exchange.
Right.
And having it to store that value. You'd see that now with the new currencies that we have, that store of value is much more undermined, right? Because you're buying less and less stuff with the same money. And nothing has happened. I mean, the goods have not improved. And hence, that's why you need to separate the two. And when we talk about
the value of the commodity and service versus the value of the money itself.
The money just means to exchange the value. We can actually go to the barter system today with all its primitivities. You can come to me today and say, hey, Andisa, I want to help you. I want you to help me do a business plan. I'll give you 3 cars. Right? Nothing stops us from doing that today. In fact,
some people are starting to really formalize that these days,
absolutely, right? But it's not the way to scale up, right? It's not the way to create a business that can transcend borders, and it could, because remember,
there's that too.
I have people now who do, so whenever I get a cow, and what do I go do to my stuff? Do I give them one cow, or do I now cut up the cow and now value a piece of steak? Or so there's some complexities over there. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that separate the values, the notion of money, because money itself has no value. I did say it has no intrinsic value. And suspend the example I gave you of gold coins, because there's some value. I said you could melt the thing. But I'm saying as fiat currency, the rand as it stands today, or the dollar as it stands today, has no value, has no intrinsic value.
So, okay, I want to think about how I want to ask this question, but I want to take a call. The number to dial is 011-883-0702. My guest is Andisa Ramavhunga. He's Group Chief Advisor at Ntiyiso Consulting Group. We're talking about money. And I got to tell you, I'm struggling with separating the value of the service and product that I need versus the value of the money, the means by which I am able to access that product through, I suppose at this point, the fiat system currency. He's going to develop that for me. But please give me a call. What is money? Love to hear from you. Katleho is in Sebokeng. Good evening to you, Katleho.
Hey, good evening, bro.
Hey, Katleho, what's up? Hey, bro, where have you been, man?
Hey, man.
No, I understand, my brother.
Anyway,
electricity is scarce these days. Go ahead, sir.
Very interesting topic. So I had I'm not an expert in any way in terms of economics and finances, but I was given a task to do a demo newspaper, just a newspaper as an assignment. So I decided to do a financial newspaper. And I discovered that President Nixon of the United States replaced the gold standard with the dollar standard. And that's where everything changed. And that's why, I mean, before President Nixon, our currency, the rand, was pretty strong, and people could do a lot with very little money. But since the dollar standard, things have changed. I mean, our money, the rand, is measured against the dollar, and the dollar is just a piece of paper. There's no value, unlike gold, which was a standard, unlike the gold standard, which had its own intrinsic value. So for me, money today is just an idea. It does not have value. And I agree. Most of what I wanted to say, your guest just elaborated on it to say that it is the reason we have so much inflation everywhere in the world. It's because we are using money that is measured by the gold, the fiat system. So for me, the idea that value for me is bigger than just a piece of paper that we use to exchange goods and services.
Katleho, thanks very much for your call, my brother. Thanks very much. I really appreciate it. Please give us a call on 011-883-0702. So, before the advent of the Nixon moment, before when the rand and all other currencies were still denominated by the gold, we understand that there was a thing that you could point to say that this rand represents a half an ounce of that piece of gold, right? There was a correlation. What is the currency now valued on? What is it standing on?
No. So it's not backed by, and it's right. I think is it Katleho, right?
Katleho,
I think Nixon did this decision in 1971 where he practically make the announcement that the dollar would not be backed by gold. So basically, it's a worthless piece of paper. I think when I remember reading, sometimes I think it cost them something like 3 cents to print the actual
note,
in $3 cents or to peel the actual $1 note and something like that. And that's why a dollar is actually worth 97 cents or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think the history is
the note.
The note
itself. Yeah.
So you can say it's worth 3 cents because it costs the material they used to print the paper. Is cost that much, and yet it denotes 97 cents if you do the math. If you do a $1. So the history is richer. And now you are again throwing me into the domain of international relations and global politics. But it's safe to say, let me just maybe, because another question would be, but why the dollar? Why didn't we continue as in the standards?
Absolutely. That was the question I was going to ask after this.
Yeah. So, and this is where politics come to play. And if you have a chance, Aubrey, or the listeners are out there, there's a fantastic book that came out, I think 2 or 3 years ago by Ray Dalio. It's called The Changing World Order, where it sort of like unpacks these principles in a very simple way. So basically what happened is that the US, after World War II, became the global hegemony, right? The superpower. Prior to that, it was Britain. And that's why at some point, and I'll come to define what I call the reserve currency. The reserve currency was the pound. And the pound was
everybody talked about le bond,
was gold backed, and we can even go back in history again with the changing world order. This is what Ray Dalio argues, where the Dutch Guild was the reserve currency. It was also backed by
at some point it was the tulip, the flower.
I mean, they used to even use shells, by the way, from the sea, but they quickly ran into problems with that. But what then happens is that with the US coming into power, you as a global hegemony, the biggest, strongest gorilla, you dictate the global rules. And one of the things that they did was to say the dollar was going to be the means of exchange between the countries, or the dominant currency for global trade. And with that, they established new governance structures. And that's why you have a lot of these world call them institutions in Washington, the likes of the World Bank, the IMF, the likes of WHO, by the way, the UN. So all those structures together with the reserve currency are what preserves, I would argue, the dominance of the US as we know it. And hence that's why today trade is done mainly in dollars. But when that happened, by the way, and I'm saying when they became that global hegemony, they were still backed in gold. And by the way, it was not a once-off in 1971. They did it gradually. And next thing all it did was just remove totally the dependence on gold. And I mean, you could understand at the time, you needed gold to print money, and it made it very difficult for their global ambitions. And you can only do so much because also gold is a finite commodity, right? And they needed much more of this to facilitate trade and so forth. And as a dominant power, and I don't want to delve into politics because it comes out with other murky challenges. But safe to say that they became then the global hegemon, and the dollar became that currency. And obviously the fall away of all the other currencies that were.
So the value of the dollar was really derived from their global hegemony. It was derived from their ability to exercise the most violence.
I didn't want to.
You don't want to go there.
But, they say the strength of a country, sure. it's in military might, it's economy, and the function of the population.
So there, I don't want you to say it. Let me say it. So the previously the dollar and most other countries were connected to the amount of gold that they have in their reserve banks. Right?
Yeah.
So I knew that if I've got 10 rands, I have the equivalent of however many ounces of gold in the bank.
Yeah.
I mean, in the reserve bank.
In the reserve bank, yes.
Come 1970, whatever, Nixon comes and he says, listen, the dollar specifically is not going to be connected to gold or a specific commodity.
Yeah.
It is going to be connected to our power in the world. Is that what it is?
Well, it's
our power, meaning our ability to influence certain realities, economic realities in the world.
Look, I wouldn't necessarily say it was that bad. So, but all they did is I mean, just to simplify, they became what we call the superpower, right? And remember, with that, they needed to fund certain things. And naturally, like any other superpower, they needed to borrow the money.
Right.
And what happens when you borrow the money in your own currency? What happens when you pay it back? You print it. You create money out of thin air.
That logic.
You create money out of thin air.
So you borrow from who and you pay back who?
So you can borrow, for example, from Japan.
Right.
I think those were, in fact, China was one of the biggest guys, as well as,
because this sounds like the biggest heist
it
ever,
is. And hence, I remember my analogy that says money today is one of the most misunderstood concepts. And I think it's an illusion.
Yep.
And it's one of these things that, if we continue the way it is, I do not think it's sustainable. But sure. I want to suspend that because those are my deep political views that I can.
You understand there's a part 2 to this, right? Because we're running out of time.
Yeah, okay. No, absolutely. So they'll borrow money. It's because you're borrowing the money, but whenever it comes to paying the money, they'll then print the money and pay to you. So it was an economic means rather than let's be violent and dominate the world. So I don't think necessarily it came out of malice, but having that power obviously meant that we are able to do certain things that other people are not being able to do, like print money. But obviously that thing, as we've mentioned now, has got a negative impact. The printing of money leads to inflation, right? The printing of money it devalues. So these reserve currencies, by the way, you also peg it to your own formal currency. So it means, so all it means is that South Africa, for example, the country will then stock up in dollars and also keep rands. But so for any trade, we'll then exchange those dollars for
instead of gold, we now are dollar denominated.
And we have no real basis or determination of what is real value. So I would even argue that those things are manipulated. But
I think it's the biggest heist we've ever heard of.
I think so too. And we can unpack it for me to say, look, I think it's a bubble. I think the world will eventually pay for what's happening, because I'll give you an example. The amount of money in the world right now, if you were to put it together, the stat says that 97% of it is non-physical. So there's no minerals, there's no coins to back the money. And
what backs it then?
Oh, it's printed out of thin air. And most of it is created by banks, by the way, whenever they do loans and do credits and do deposits and all those.
I got to tell you right now, Andisa, I'm completely lost.
Yeah.
Right now.
But I guess the point that I'm trying to get to entrepreneurs. That's why the concept of creating value, it's important, right? Because there's I always say two things that at least we have on our side, besides as people, besides this whole noise of money creation and all those things, is to solve real problems in the world.
Yes.
And scale that ability to solve real problems.
Yes.
You'll quickly realize that this is what you and I have been talking about in our past, and this is where the real value is created. Whatever denomination or the exchange of value is out there is immaterial.
Right.
Because if you create the value, if the denomination is 2 out there or is 5, you will get your fair share worth.
Sure.
Because you are solving, let's say you are solving $1 billion problem, and you are able to scale it up, and it impacts 10 million people. That's where you need to be participating, and that's the value I guess you and I have been talking about.
I heard somebody say the other day that the reason why a lot of people are eluded by money is because they chase money, not value.
Absolutely.
And money chases value. So if you chase value, then you will attract money.
But the point is exactly this. Money itself has no value.
Right.
Money is only a denomination to exchange that value.
Yes.
So if you chase it, you're chasing paper.
Yes.
That's it. And that paper changes from time to time, and you don't even have control of it.
Precisely.
But you have control of the value you're creating. You have the control of the lives you're touching, the scaling of that, the employment that you're creating, the goods that and you can always come back to this fictional economy and exchange it for what you are really worth.
011-883-0702. Andisa Ramavhunga is my guest. Alex Moore on Twitter says, what happens to inflation if we lock the price of goods? Would it prevent our money from losing value over time? If we lock the price of goods. So for example, if we had kept bread at 50 cents per loaf, would that prevent inflation?
Look, it's not about locking of goods. I hear where he's going, but it's a bit of an impractical. And remember, what drives inflation is not so much. I did say it's not so much the good itself, right? It's simply, okay, let me explain it very simply. It's too much money chasing too few goods. What happens when there's so much demand of the goods and so much of the money?
Yeah.
Money becomes cheap.
Yeah.
Money becomes cheap.
I think.
Right? Which means the goods themselves become expensive.
Yeah.
That's simply, it's an equation. You can't just hold the other part and hope that the other part does not get impacted.
And maybe, and I say this very quietly, maybe there was some sense in if the dollar falls, we'll pick it up. I mean, if the rand falls, we'll pick it up. Because embedded in that is the understanding of the valuelessness of money versus the value of the commodity or service that the money is supposed to buy. I mean,
I'm tempted to agree with you.
I'm being very controversial. Yeah?
Except I'm a patriot, right? Because you must understand that a lot of people don't have the privilege that you and I have. It's not a lot of people who are making goods. A lot of people are employed in the economy. They earn a salary which is not growing we would argue with inflation. And that's why I spoke about hyperinflation. That's when things go horribly wrong. So the devaluing of money is a very real concern, just to the well-being of a nation. And it impacts the poor the most. I mean, you can imagine a person who's getting a grant that's 250, and the value of that 250, it gets eroded over time. That means they are able to access less and less of these goods that are out there. So
I was listening yesterday to an old lady say, listen, with the 1,500 odd, whatever I get from, I used to be able to buy this, and this. I can't anymore with exactly the same money. That is what you're talking about when you speak of inflation, right? Of inflation.
And hence that's why I'm saying let's even take this value at least responsibly and saying to entrepreneurs, when we say concentrate on the value you're creating on the goods and services side, on the real economy, I guess that's what I'm saying. It's about the production of goods and services and less around playing with money. And we can come back and talk, for example, cryptocurrency and all these other.
That's where I want to go to the next time you and I meet. But I think as a bit of homework, I think for those of us that are listening to this conversation, is we need to get our minds around the value of goods and services versus the value of money. And be able to separate those two concepts properly in order for us to really be able to have real conversations about them. But because in our minds, the value of money equals somehow the value in terms of our experience. The value of money is somehow connected to the value of we haven't been able to learn how to separate those things in order to have the conversation you want to take us to. But let's quickly take the call from Khotso in Midrand. Hi, Khotso.
Yeah, Mr. Oprah, evening to you.
Evening to you. Guest. Yeah, go for it.
Good evening.
Look, tell your guest but when you're answering me, I'm requesting that you must go slow. On the issue of the currency, it's too quick.
Yeah.
On the issue of the currency, you must just define for me the complexity and the juxtapose, of which is not difficult. The issue of BRICS, that we are going to do away of the dollar. You must just go into detail the dollar losing value internationally in the international market and the reintroduction of the yen or of the BRICS currency, or you can say the Russian rupee, if you like,
or the South African rand.
Yeah. If you like.
Hey, it's nice. All right. No, listen, I hear you, my brother. I'm going to ask him not to answer that question now because we've completely run out of time. But please, in 2 weeks' time, we go into part 2. I think we might even go into part 3 of what money is, so that we can then be able to deal with the questions that we hear about the de-dollarization, but speak about them from an economic point of view, not just from a political point of view. So I hear your question. But if you can just bear with us, we are going to go into the second part, maybe even the third part of the question that you're raising, because we must also still go to the issue of, what do you call that currency? The Bitcoin.
Or the cryptocurrency.
Cryptocurrency. We still need to go into cryptocurrency. How does that work? So that we can be able to have more economic conversations around those things and understand the realities that you're asking about, but from an economic point of view. So that maybe we can then be able to understand that maybe the rand is also worthy of being mentioned amongst the great currencies of the world. Koto in Midrand, thank you very much for your call. Much appreciated. Anyway, Andisa Ramavhunga, do you see that there needs to be a part 2 of this?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to help me understand how to conceptually separate the value of the goods and services versus the value of the money itself. I need a tool to be able to separate that in my mind so that I can move, because I can feel that I haven't got it yet. And then, of course, in the next segment, we can then go into this evolution from barter to crypto. Thank you very much for this great conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Andisa Ramavhunga is the Group Chief Advisor at Ntiyiso Consulting Group. How do we find you, Andisa?
You can find me at info@ntiyisoconsulting.co.za.
Wonderful stuff. Let's